Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Powell. I'm an active duty U.S. Army officer. I work at INSCOM, the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command on Fort Belvoir. And while my material's coming up, you probably think there might not be that many things that we share in common. I disagree. You probably use R for work. So do I. You probably use it for a side project or a hobby. So have I. A good day for you might be several hours of uninterrupted coding and no meetings. Same here. But where we differ is that I do all my coding in combat boots and camouflage, in a cubicle, in an office building. But hey, I don't really mind, because if people can't see you, they can't bother you. So when Jared talked to me about presenting here, another thing about the difference between you and me is I can't put my hands in my pockets, because you don't do that in military uniforms. Crazy stuff, right? When Jared talked to me about presenting here, I thought, yeah, sure, sounds great. I asked my boss, he's like, yeah, absolutely. And then I asked the people that control what you say in public, and realized it was going to be pretty hard to give an R talk without talking about my work, about the projects I'm working on, the data I use, the methods I use, because as I said, I work in an intelligence organization, and they're kind of protective of those things. There we go. The other thing I noticed, and I might take this back to my organization, is in our ability to look cool in camouflage, we've made it impossible to read from a distance anything on the title slide. So what I want to talk to you about is how we're using R in our studio really to democratize data science, to bring it down to our analysts and get them doing all sorts of things that they weren't doing before. All right, next slide, please. So the other thing I did was I'm thinking I'm going to be all sneaky, and I'm going to save my PowerPoint slides as a PDF where they're uneditable and they're locked so that nothing could be manipulated and misrepresent me later on. And of course, I did it in such a fashion that the computer that doesn't have Adobe Acrobat on it can't pull up my PDF. So you're going to see it through a web browser. I think it'll work. Okay. So the things I want to talk about, a little bit how we're involving R in our studio, the whole ecosystem there to incorporate data analysis in every aspect of what we do. And like any other organization, the Army and my organization, INSCOM, wants to leverage data in new and powerful ways. We need people to do that. We need skills to do that. I'm going to try to explain a few of those today. So we'll kind of walk through a little bit about how we're using data, a little bit how we're trying to increase the data literacy of our analysts, a little bit how we're trying to turn some tedious manual processes into automated, repeatable, reproducible workflows. Some of the questions we're trying to get after that really just weren't possible before. And then finally, how we're trying to leverage Shiny to put app development in the hands of the analyst, who's got a little bit of know-how and a good idea. All right, next slide, please. So every organization has some diagram like this. This is how we do things, right? So this is the U.S. Army intelligence process, and I would say it mirrors many of the data science pipelines or workflows that maybe you've seen. I'll start in the top right corner. Assuming we've got a well-formed question, and that's a big assumption, right? Most of the time, I think the people that come to me with data science dreams are thinking that data science is going to give them the question that we're then going to answer for them. We really like you to come with a good question, and if not, we'll help you refine it, scope it to something we can do in our lifetimes. It may involve some collection, a little bit of cleaning, some processing. We'll throw a few analytic techniques at it. And at the end of the day, hopefully, we've got something that is worth packaging up. The results, the methodology, something that we want to share and maybe use again. And I'll point out that I would caution you from adopting this model for your own organization, because as you see, it goes on forever. Which I think you can interpret two ways. Either, well, that's good, they're always trying to improve, that's noble. Or, who cares if we get it right this time, we're just going to do it again. All right, next slide, please. There we go. Okay. So I'd like to introduce the first analogy that you may or may not keep up with as we go through. And that is, I walked out my front door this morning and my yard's full of leaves. It wasn't yesterday, but it is today. So how do I deal with that? I think I've got a few options. The first is I grab a rake and I pick them up. The second is I get with my neighbors, and I use that time I could have been raking to come up with some grand neighborhood plan. And we're going to come up with something that maybe by next fall will be effective at taking care of our leaf problem. Or maybe I bank on Fairfax County saying, all our neighborhoods have leaf problems. We should try to solve this problem for everybody. And that's going to take 10 years and a ton of money and never happen. So none of those are necessarily like bad ideas, but only one of them really takes care of my leaf problem today. And that's me doing something about it. So in our venture or endeavor here to incorporate data science into what we do in our intelligence community, we need the long-term plans, we need the short-term plans, but somebody's got to do stuff today. And that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today. I think it's really important that we take the analysts we have with the resources we have to solve the problems we have today. One of the things we did to get after this in the open source intelligence community was to create a data science course. So we call it a data science course, but really it's more like data science counseling. People come in, they tell us about their problems, we give them some coping techniques like dplyr, ggplot, and hopefully everybody leaves a little bit happier and better able to tackle their job. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so the Army is a pretty old organization, 243 years old, in fact. And as I've made the rounds in my organization, I've encountered a few Excel spreadsheets that I think are almost that old. And what's tough about the Excel spreadsheets is, you got some analysts who's sitting there for hours every day or hours every week, and they're, copying and pasting and filtering and joining and splitting and merging, whatever they're doing. Man, you just want to automate that stuff for them because it's so painful to watch a guy do that. And then you run into the mystery VBA script that, it's critical. Our section depends on this, but nobody knows how it works. And we'll never know because the guy who wrote it password protected that spreadsheet like 10 years ago, and then he retired. So you're out of luck. So when you find this guy who's got the spreadsheet job, and you say, hey, let me take that 8 hours and turn it into 8 seconds for you. It's really interesting to see the transition that happens, both in the scope of what they're willing to consider as a potential question to answer. Like maybe we don't just have to look at a week's worth of data because it takes a day to do that. Maybe we can look at months, or maybe we can look at years. But then they start getting needy, right? Because it takes 30 minutes to run the code that does a 5-year analysis. And I'm like, you're doing 100 times more in an hour than you used to do in a week. Like, lay off me. And sometimes it takes a minute for complicated things to happen. But I like to see how when you give somebody their time back, that's how we always try to start. Is like, let me give you your time back so that you can think of something better to do instead of juggling spreadsheets on Monday. Maybe you just get to think for a little bit, and maybe you get to do something a little more worthy of human thought. Next slide, please. Okay, so in a zero diversity focus group of the 3 people in my office, one of them did not recognize the left-hand side of this as my attempt to build a Plinko board. Y'all know what Plinko is? Okay, so if you don't, Google Plinko, The Price is Right, and you'll learn what Plinko is all about. And you'll see why I put that up here in a minute. So manual processes are prone to error, or at least variation. I think back to some of my grad school work, and I pity anybody that followed me and was supposed to fall in on that project and take it to the next level, because some of that work, I knew it was good at the time. I knew how the scripts worked. I knew what order to run them in. I knew what assumptions I was making. But the critical shortcoming in all that is that it required me. And if I'm not there, then the whole thing falls apart. Well, I think anybody, if you tried to recreate some of my old figures or something, you might as well try playing Plinko to rebuild what I had built. You just go through this random sequence of maybe he did cross-validation, maybe he removed some outliers, I don't know. And I think that's garbage, right? So life with R Markdown is a different thing altogether. I can capture everything from how I acquired the data, what I did to clean it, any steps I took along the way, I'm capturing it. And explaining it as I go. And so this is a skill that I think has been critical to teach our analysts. Like, I should be able to run a backtrace on any conclusion you draw all the way to the start. What data did you use? What did you do to that data? Where did it come from? What assumptions are you making? Things that seem reasonable to ask, but all that is lost when you've got somebody personally handling a bunch of Excel spreadsheets and there's no like quality control to that. I mean, how do you confirm results with that model? You run it again, you do the work again, and what if the answer you get the second time is different? You do it again, and then it's like a best 2 out of 3, or like at what point do you stop and say, okay, this was the right answer? I'm a huge fan, and we try to instill this in our analysts through training and any project we do, that we're going to document this thing so that somebody else with the same question in a different area can repurpose it. Next slide, please. So a lot of our work has been focused on turning some of the wishful thinking ideas of our analysts into R code. And so something as simple as like the map in front of you, if there's nothing complex going on under the hood here. You've got a few data sources coming in, representing events of a certain type in certain places, and I want to look at them all together. Good luck doing that in a spreadsheet. But it's not hard to connect an analyst to the leaflet code that does it, to a little bit of dplyr to bring stuff together, to merge stuff from the same source onto the same location and put it all in a pop-up. Like, it's a real easy way to let somebody be able to drill into events in a way that was just unthinkable before. So as we introduce them to these ideas in training or just in sort of the consulting model that we use, it's pretty interesting to see where their mind goes and the questions that they'll be willing to start asking. So think about the next question. The next question would be, where have protests in whatever country you're interested in, where have they occurred in the last 2 days? Like, how do you answer that? Well, it's pretty easy. You go to Google, or you go to your favorite news site. Maybe you got some go-to sites for, protests in the last 2 days in Uganda.com, and you'll get exactly what you want until I say, I don't really care about the last 2 days anymore. I want to know about the last 2 months. Okay, well, maybe there's a protest in Uganda in the last 2 months.com. And if there's not, it gets a little harder because those protests aren't in the headlines anymore. It gets terrible if I say, what about the last 2 years, or last 10 years, or last 20 years? To find that stuff, now you got to start working with a database. Not a problem, because there's publicly available databases that categorize events and make them available to you for free. It's pretty easy stuff, except that the website that you go to interact with that data may not answer all the questions you have. But they'll give you the data. In this room, like, that's the dream. No problem. Give me the data. I'll take it from there. Outside this room, that's a nightmare. Because if you didn't put it in my web interface tool, then I don't know what to do. So we're trying to bridge that gap with our analysts. I think the analyst response saying, like, if I'm going to use this data and I have to build my own analysis and visualization pipeline, like, that data is worthless. How am I supposed to do that? I don't think it's necessarily like you have to build your own pipeline. It's you get to build your own pipeline. Like, you get to bring all that stuff in. You get to do whatever you want with it. You get to merge it with whatever other data provider data you can get a hold of. You can do whatever analysis that data will support. I think that's a really powerful paradigm shift for people to start thinking along those lines instead of just accepting whatever you've been given. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is the closest I'll get to telling you what we really do. So at some point we've got to share the work we're doing, right? You can do that in an R Markdown document. You can send it out as a HTML document if you don't work for an organization that strips all HTML documents from your emails. Or maybe you want to host it as a Shiny app. And a Shiny app is fantastic for us because a lot of the questions our analysts have that are geographically focused, easily transferable workflow to another analyst in another location with a different country of interest. I bring up, protests in Uganda, and you say, well, I care about Belarus. Well, there's a pretty good chance that whatever workflow I use for Uganda, you could probably apply. And that's one of the big things that we use Shiny for. But the real reason I love Shiny is not so much just that capability. It's what I appreciate about it that maybe is unique to me. And that is, I've been in the Army 14 years, so I'm not a full stack developer. I'm not a front end, back end, whatever other ends are required to build a nice, sophisticated, production quality, cloud-based, scalable app. Like, I don't know how to do that stuff, but I can make a pretty sweet, shiny app if, if I know the question you want to ask and you can connect me to the data we need to use. Like, that's a pretty powerful thing. I didn't learn that in the Army, flying helicopters or teaching statistics or anything else I've done. It's not that hard to connect an analyst to a really powerful capability through the form of Shiny. So if the right solution for a problem is to create an interactive app, I think we have a couple options. The first is we try to go by the closest thing on the market. The closest thing on the market probably isn't exactly what we want, and it's probably really expensive. So I liken this to buying really overpriced shoes that don't quite fit. Like, okay, maybe they look good, but they don't really do they don't really do what you want. The other thing we can do is, if there's nothing on the market, we can basically solicit vendors to to create something that's exactly what we want. Well, we're going to spend a year coming up with our requirements, then we're going to solicit bids, then we're going to run a pilot study, and then we're going to review contracts. And by the time it's all done, it's not probably exactly what we want, or maybe we don't even have that problem anymore. So I liken this to ordering like custom back-ordered shoes for your kids. Like, by the time they get there, the kids' feet they're not the right size anymore. It's a terrible plan. Or maybe I can just build it myself. Excuse me. If I build it myself, the shoe analogy kind of breaks down here because I don't know anything about building shoes. But I take that back. If you gave me the materials and gave me the tools and Stack Overflow, I could probably build you some shoes. They wouldn't be that pretty, but they might be effective, just like my Shiny apps. All right, so to go back to my leaf-covered yard problem, only one of these solutions puts a solution in the hands of the analysts with any speed, and that's if we do it ourselves. Now, this isn't necessarily the solution for enterprise applications, to run our entire HR system. Maybe I shouldn't build that in my office. But for a small-ish problem that going through these massive procurement processes is just too painful, those problems just go unsolved unless we give ourselves the tools to do it in-house with an analyst or two, which is actually really fun. So I spend pretty much all day with our studio open because all the things I just told you about are the tasks that I do to bring value to the organization. I'm automating things with scripts. I'm creating workflows that document common questions and how we approach them in R Markdown. I'm building Shiny apps to make a tailorable question answerable to an analyst anywhere. They don't need to have extreme data skills to be able to use it. A little bit of training and we can get them on their way. All right, so I'll kind of tell you what's going on in this slide then. We're interested, of course, in what's going on around the world and instability in particular. So I made this a couple weeks ago after, as kind of a repurposed slide from a presentation I gave a month ago when I was highlighting this big dip in article tone in the top right corner. So the big dip there happens to be corresponding to when in Uganda the president was really being criticized for arresting and allegedly torturing one of the members of their government who, his name is Bobby Wine. You might know him as a Ugandan pop star. He got pulled over as with weapons in the car, at least that was the charge. He gets arrested, and so the whole world starts piling on about how this is, abuse of power and all that stuff. Well, it creates this huge spike in article volume related to the president of Uganda. Everybody's getting upset about it. The whole world's calling for him to, behave better and such. But it's kind of short-lived. Within a couple of weeks, it returns to normal. Maybe this is something that an app could bring to an analyst's attention. But I'll also point out, this is the trouble with news. You see this other big spike on the right-hand side and a lot of positive tone about it. That's when Kanye West visited and gave him some shoes. So our interest was higher, but short-lived for the latter. Okay, and with that, since we're not taking questions, I won't just have to say that's classified if you ask me a tough one. And I am complete. Thank you very much for your time, and Jared for the premium talking spot.